Ethan Cole sat in the expansive living room of his penthouse, the city lights twinkling beyond the floor to ceiling windows. From this high up, the world below seemed small and distant, a reflection of his own existence. The sleek modern furniture, the priceless artwork on the walls, and the perfectly curated atmosphere were all testaments to his immense wealth and success. Yet, none of it brought him comfort. The silence that filled his home was deafening, a constant reminder of what he had lost. 10 years ago, Ethan's life had been different. He wasn't just a billionaire back then. He was a husband and a father. His daughter Sophie was the light of his life, her laughter filling every corner of their home. She was 7 years old when she disappeared, and from that day forward, Ethan's world shattered. They had been on a family trip, stopping at a scenic riverside park for a picnic. It was meant to be a day of relaxation, a break from Ethan's demanding schedule. But a single moment of distraction changed everything. One moment, Sophie was there, chasing butterflies along the riverbank, and the next, she was gone. The search for Sophie had been exhaustive. Ethan spared no expense, hiring the best private investigators, organizing search parties, and even offering a substantial reward for any information. The media covered the story relentlessly, but despite all efforts, no trace of Sophie was ever found. The guilt consumed him. If only he had watched her more closely. If only he had been more vigilant. His marriage crumbled under the strain, his wife unable to cope with the loss. She left him, and Ethan was left alone, drowning in regret and unanswered questions. Now, a decade later, Ethan was a man who had everything and nothing at the same time. His business empire flourished. His name was synonymous with success, but his heart remained empty. That evening, after another grueling day of meetings and negotiations, Ethan felt an overwhelming sense of loneliness. The thought of returning to his cold, silent penthouse was unbearable. On a whim, he instructed his driver to take him somewhere, anywhere, that didn't feel so empty. His driver suggested a small diner on the outskirts of the city, a place known for its comforting food and unpretentious atmosphere. It was an unusual choice for a man like Ethan, but he agreed. Perhaps in its simplicity, he might find a moment's peace. The diner was nothing like the high-end restaurants Ethan usually frequented. It was a modest establishment, tucked away on a quiet street, with a neon sign that flickered faintly in the evening light. Inside, the atmosphere was warm and welcoming. The scent of freshly brewed coffee and baked goods filled the air, mingling with the low murmur of conversation and the clinking of silverware. Families and friends gathered around tables, sharing stories and laughter. It was the kind of place Ethan hadn't stepped into in years. A place that felt alive. He chose a corner booth by the window, where he could observe the world outside without drawing too much attention to himself. As he settled in, he took a deep breath, letting the unassuming charm of the diner wash over him. The chatter of the patrons, the hum of the jukebox playing an old tune, and the warm glow of the hanging lights created an ambiance that was both soothing and nostalgic. For a moment, Ethan allowed himself to relax, something he rarely did. But his thoughts, as they so often did, drifted back to Sophie. He had spent countless nights imagining what she might look like now. She would be 17, almost 18, an adult. Would her auburn hair still shimmer like it did when she was a child? Would her eyes, so full of wonder and curiosity, still hold the same spark? He closed his eyes, trying to picture her, but the years had dulled his memory. All he had left was an old photograph, creased and worn from being carried in his wallet for so long. "Good evening, sir. Can I get you something to drink?" The soft voice pulled Ethan from his thoughts. He opened his eyes and looked up, and for a moment his breath caught in his throat. The waitress standing before him was young, perhaps in her late teens, with auburn hair that cascaded in soft waves around her shoulders. Her polite smile was warm but reserved, and there was something about her demeanor that felt hauntingly familiar. He struggled to find his voice. Coffee, please," he managed to say, his eyes lingering on her longer than he intended. She nodded and walked away, her movements graceful and unhurried. As she turned, Ethan's gaze fell on a faint scar on her arm, a crescent-shaped mark. His heart raced. Sophie had a scar just like that, a reminder of the time she fell while playing in the garden. Ethan shook his head, chastising himself. It couldn't be her. It was impossible. And yet, a tiny flicker of hope ignited in his chest. a dangerous, fragile hope. Ethan couldn't tear his eyes away from the young waitress. Every time she passed by his table, he studied her movements, her expressions, her voice. There was something about her that struck a chord deep within him. Her smile, though faint, reminded him of Sophie's, slightly crooked on one side. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear as she scribbled on her notepad was exactly how Sophie used to do it. And then there was the scar, a detail too specific to ignore. When she returned with his coffee, Ethan summoned the courage to speak to her again. "This is a nice place," he said, trying to sound casual. "Do you work here full-time?" The waitress nodded. "Yes, for now. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work." "What's your name?" he asked, his heart pounding in anticipation. "Emily," she replied, offering a polite smile. Ethan felt a pang of disappointment. It wasn't Sophie, but his eyes betrayed his skepticism as he studied her more closely. Could she have changed her name? Could she have been given another identity? Emily noticed his lingering gaze and shifted uncomfortably. "Is there something wrong?" she asked, her tone cautious. Ethan hesitated. "No, nothing. You remind me of someone," he said finally, his voice faltering. She gave a small nod and walked away, leaving him alone with his thoughts. Reaching into his wallet, Ethan pulled out the photograph of Sophie. He held it up, comparing it to the young waitress. The resemblance was undeniable, and the scar only solidified his growing suspicion. But how could it be her? Why would she be here, working in a diner with no memory of him? That night, Ethan left the diner with more questions than answers. As his car drove through the quiet streets, his mind raced with possibilities. Could it truly be Sophie? Or was he so desperate for closure that he was seeing what he wanted to see? Either way, he knew one thing for certain: he couldn't let this go. Ethan couldn't sleep that night. He lay in his king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling while his mind raced with images of the waitress, Emily. Was she truly his Sophie, or was he grasping at a mirage? The doubt gnawed at him, but so did the flicker of hope. He had spent 10 years haunted by guilt and despair. Now, for the first time, there was a possibility, however slim, that Sophie was alive. The next morning, Ethan decided to return to the diner. This time, he wasn't going as just a customer. He needed answers. He arrived early, before the lunch rush, and found a seat near the counter, where he had a clear view of the staff. Emily was there, wiping down tables and chatting with the cook. She looked carefree, her smile genuine. It was a stark contrast to the solemn image Ethan had carried of Sophie in his mind. When Emily noticed him, her smile faltered slightly, as if she recognized him from the night before. She approached his table with a polite, professional demeanor. "Good morning, sir. Back again so soon?" Ethan nodded, trying to keep his tone light. "The coffee was good, and the atmosphere is refreshing." Emily smiled faintly. "Glad to hear it. Can I get you something to eat this time?" "Sure, whatever you recommend," Ethan replied, watching her closely. As she jotted down his order and walked away, Ethan took the opportunity to observe her interactions with others. She was kind and attentive to the customers, her demeanor warm yet guarded. But there were moments, subtle pauses, fleeting glances, when she seemed lost in thought, as if carrying a weight she didn't speak of. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her story. After she brought his food, he decided to press further. "Emily," he began cautiously, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but have you always lived around here?" Emily hesitated, her grip on the tray tightening. "Not always," she replied, her tone careful. "I've moved around a bit. Why do you ask?" Ethan shrugged, feigning casual interest. "Just curious. You seem familiar, that's all." Her eyes flickered with a mix of curiosity and wariness. "I get that sometimes," she said with a small smile, "but I'm pretty sure we've never met before." Ethan let the conversation drop, not wanting to push too hard and risk scaring her off. But his instincts told him he was onto something. As he left the diner, he made a decision. He needed to dig deeper into Emily's past. If she truly was Sophie, then someone, somewhere, had answers. Ethan wasted no time in reaching out to his private investigator, Marcus Hale, a man who had worked tirelessly on Sophie's case years ago. Marcus had retired recently, but when Ethan explained the situation, the older man agreed to take on the case. "This could be a long shot, Ethan," Marcus warned as they sat in Ethan's office. "But if you're certain about the resemblance and the scar, it's worth looking into." Ethan handed Marcus a detailed description of Emily. along with everything he had observed about her at the diner. I need to know everything about her, where she's from, who her family is, and how she ended up here. Marcus nodded. I'll start right away. Give me a few days. While Marcus worked, Ethan found himself unable to focus on his business. He canceled meetings and delegated tasks to his team, something he rarely did. Every spare moment, his thoughts drifted back to Emily. If she truly was Sophie, then why hadn't she contacted him? Did she not remember him? Or was there something more sinister at play? 3 days later, Marcus returned with preliminary findings. I managed to get some basic information on her, he said, placing a folder on Ethan's desk. Emily Carter, 19 years old, no records of her living in this city before 3 years ago. Before that, it's a bit of a blank. Ethan frowned, flipping through the documents. A blank? What do you mean? She was adopted, Marcus explained. The trail goes cold after her adoption records. Whoever handled it made sure the details were sealed tight. That's unusual for most cases unless someone wants to hide something. Ethan's heart raced. Do you think she could be Sophie? It's possible, Marcus admitted, but we'll need more proof. I suggest a DNA test. It's the only way to be certain. Ethan nodded, determination hardening his features. Do whatever it takes to make it happen. The next time Ethan visited the diner, he came prepared. Marcus had advised him to approach Emily carefully, ensuring she didn't feel threatened or overwhelmed. Ethan decided to take a more personal approach, hoping to gain her trust. When Emily saw him, she seemed genuinely surprised. Back again? She asked, her smile more relaxed this time. Ethan chuckled. I guess this place is growing on me. She took his order and lingered at the table for a moment longer than usual. You know, you're not like our regular customers, she said, her tone curious. Most people who come here are locals. Ethan hesitated, then decided to be honest. I've been looking for someone for a long time, he said quietly. And when I saw you, I couldn't shake the feeling that you might be connected to that. Emily tilted her head, her expression a mix of confusion and intrigue. What do you mean? Ethan sighed, choosing his words carefully. I lost someone very dear to me many years ago, my daughter. And when I saw you, well, you reminded me of her. Emily's eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked as though she might say something. But then she shook her head. I'm sorry for your loss, but I think you've got the wrong person. I don't have any family. Ethan's heart ached at her words. No family? He repeated softly. Emily shook her head again. I was adopted when I was young. I don't know anything about my biological parents. Her words were like a confirmation of Ethan's deepest suspicions. He fought to keep his composure, knowing this was just the beginning of uncovering the truth. Thank you for telling me, he said gently. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. As she walked away, Ethan knew he couldn't stop now. He was closer than ever to finding out the truth, and he wouldn't rest until he did. Ethan left the diner that day feeling more determined than ever. Emily's admission about being adopted only deepened his conviction. The pieces of the puzzle were aligning too perfectly to be a coincidence. If she truly was his Sophie, then someone had gone to great lengths to keep her hidden. Back in his office, Ethan met with Marcus to discuss the next steps. Marcus, ever pragmatic, had already devised a plan. We'll need to arrange for a DNA test, but getting her consent might be tricky. If she feels threatened or suspicious, she could disappear. Ethan frowned. I don't want to do anything unethical. She's been through enough. I'll talk to her again, build trust. If she's willing, we'll go from there. Marcus nodded. That's wise, but we'll need to move carefully. If someone orchestrated her adoption to cover something up, they might not want her found. As the days passed, Ethan returned to the diner regularly, always sitting in Emily's section and engaging her in friendly conversation. He learned bits and pieces about her life, how she enjoyed painting in her free time, how she dreamed of traveling, but felt tied to the small town. Each detail made Ethan's heart ache with the possibility that this vibrant young woman could be his long-lost daughter. One afternoon, as Emily cleared his table, Ethan decided to take a chance. Emily, I hope this doesn't come across the wrong way, but have you ever thought about finding your biological family? Her hand paused mid-motion, and she looked at him with a mixture of surprise and uncertainty. I've thought about it, she admitted, her voice quiet. But it's complicated. I don't even know where to start, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to. My life hasn't been easy, but it's mine. Ethan nodded, sensing her hesitation. I understand. It's a deeply personal decision. But if you ever change your mind, know that there are people who care about helping you. Emily gave him a small, grateful smile. Thank you. That means a lot. Meanwhile, Marcus's investigation uncovered troubling details. The adoption agency that handled Emily's case had been shut down years ago for unethical practices, including falsifying records and coercing young mothers into giving up their children. Marcus shared the findings with Ethan, who felt a surge of anger and protectiveness. If Sophie had been taken through such means, then whoever was behind it had robbed them both of a decade together. We need to find out who facilitated her adoption, Ethan said, his tone firm. Someone has answers. Marcus nodded. I'm already looking into it. But if we're dealing with people willing to cover their tracks this thoroughly, they might not back down easily. Ethan's worry for Emily grew. She had no idea of the storm brewing around her, and he was determined to shield her from it. At the same time, he knew he couldn't stop until the truth was uncovered. One evening, as Ethan sat in his study, he received a call from Marcus. I've got a lead, the investigator said. There's a name connected to her adoption records, someone who worked at the agency before it shut down. I'll track them down, but it could take time. Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. Do whatever it takes. I need to know who's behind this. Ethan returned to the diner the next day, his mind racing with Marcus's revelations. As he walked in, he noticed Emily at the counter, chatting with an older woman who seemed to be a regular customer. There was an ease in Emily's demeanor that made Ethan smile. Despite everything, she had managed to carve out a life for herself. As he approached his usual table, Emily greeted him with a warm smile. You're becoming quite the regular, Mr. Blake. Ethan, he corrected gently. And yes, I suppose I am. It's hard to stay away when the coffee is this good. Emily laughed softly. Well, I'll let the cook know. He takes his coffee seriously. As they talked, Ethan felt a growing connection to her, one that went beyond his suspicions about her identity. She was kind, intelligent, and resilient, qualities that reminded him so much of Sophie's mother. It was both comforting and bittersweet. Later that evening, as Ethan prepared to leave, Emily stopped him near the door. Ethan, she began hesitantly, I've been thinking about what you said, about finding my biological family. His heart skipped a beat. And? I don't know if I'm ready to dive into it, but if there's a way to find out more, without it being too overwhelming, I might consider it. Ethan nodded, keeping his emotions in check. That's all I ask. It's your journey, Emily, and I'll support you however I can. As he left the diner, Ethan felt a glimmer of hope. Emily's willingness to explore her past was a step forward, and he was determined to be there for her every step of the way. Ethan couldn't suppress the sense of urgency growing inside him. Marcus's lead on the former employee of the adoption agency offered the first real hope of uncovering the truth behind Emily's disappearance. Days felt like weeks as Marcus worked tirelessly to track the individual down. Meanwhile, Ethan continued to build his relationship with Emily. They spoke frequently during her shifts at the diner, and each conversation revealed new facets of her personality, her sense of humor, her compassion, and her innate intelligence. These were traits Ethan recognized as echoes of Sophie's mother, Maria. One afternoon, Marcus finally called with an update. Ethan, I found her, the woman who processed Emily's adoption. Her name is Patricia Monroe. She's retired and living in a small town about 3 hours away. Ethan's hands trembled with anticipation. Did she agree to talk? She was reluctant at first, Marcus admitted. But when I mentioned your name and the possibility of clearing her conscience, she agreed. She'll meet us tomorrow. The next morning, Ethan and Marcus drove to the quaint town where Patricia lived. Her modest home stood in stark contrast to the opulence Ethan was accustomed to. The woman who opened the door was in her late 60s, with tired eyes that hinted at years of guilt. Mr. Blake, she said hesitantly, I've been expecting you. As they sat in her living room, Ethan wasted no time. Miss Monroe, I believe my daughter Sophie was taken from me 10 years ago. The details surrounding her adoption don't add up. I need to know what happened. Patricia sighed deeply, her hands wringing together. I worked for Sunrise Adoption Agency for over 20 years. When your daughter was brought in, I didn't know the full story, but I was told she was an orphan found near a river. I later learned that wasn't true. Ethan leaned forward, his pulse pounding. What do you mean? Patricia hesitated. A powerful client of the agency paid a significant amount of money to ensure she was placed into a closed adoption. I didn't ask questions at the time. It wasn't my job to, but I've regretted it ever since. Who was this client? Ethan demanded, his voice tight with anger. Patricia shook her head. I don't know their identity. All I know is that they had connections. They wanted the girl, your daughter, out of sight and out of reach. Patricia's confession left Ethan both furious and determined. The idea that someone had deliberately orchestrated Sophie's disappearance ignited a fire within him. Whoever was behind it had to be held accountable. Do you have any records? Marcus asked, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. Patricia nodded reluctantly. I kept copies of some files after the agency shut down. I'll get them. She disappeared into another room and returned moments later with a dusty box. Inside were faded documents, including adoption records with Emily's name and information. Ethan's hands trembled as he sifted through the papers. His heart stopped when he found a note attached to the file, a single line that read, "Ensure the child is never found." That's all I have, Patricia said, her voice trembling. I'm sorry for my part in this. I never thought it would lead to something so cruel. Ethan stood, his jaw set. Thank you for coming forward. This helps more than you know. Back in the car, Marcus examined the files closely. We have enough here to start tracing who was involved, but this note, whoever wrote it wasn't just trying to cover their tracks. They were ensuring Sophie was lost forever. Ethan's grip on the steering wheel tightened. We'll find them. As Marcus dove deeper into the investigation, Ethan focused on protecting Emily. He didn't want her to face the storm that was brewing until he had solid answers. However, Emily was beginning to sense that something was amiss. One evening, as Ethan sat at his usual table in the diner, Emily approached with a concerned look. Ethan, is everything okay? You've seemed distracted lately. Ethan hesitated. He couldn't lie to her, but he also didn't want to overwhelm her. Emily, there's something I've been trying to tell you, but it's complicated. I think we should talk soon. Somewhere private. Her brow furrowed, but she nodded. Okay, just let me know when. The following day, Marcus called with a breakthrough. Ethan, we've identified the person who orchestrated the adoption, a former rival of yours, Richard Langston. He used his influence to make Sophie disappear, likely to destabilize you during your company's expansion years ago. Ethan's blood ran cold. Richard Langston had been a thorn in his side for years, but the idea that he had targeted Sophie was unimaginable. Does he know we're onto him? Not yet, Marcus replied, but it's only a matter of time. We need to act fast. That evening, Ethan met Emily outside the diner. He had decided it was time to tell her the truth. As they sat on a park bench under the fading light, he took a deep breath. Emily, I've been coming here for more than just the coffee. I believe you're my daughter, the one I lost 10 years ago. Emily's eyes widened, her breath catching. What, Ethan? I don't even know what to say. I know it sounds unbelievable, he said gently, pulling out the photograph of Sophie. But the resemblance, the scar, it all matches. And I've been investigating your past. The details line up. Tears welled in Emily's eyes as she stared at the photo. Memories she had long suppressed began to surface, flashes of a man's voice calling her name, a garden, and the riverbank where she was found. Could it really be true? She whispered, her voice trembling. Ethan reached for her hand. There's a way to know for sure, a DNA test. But no matter what, I'm here for you, Emily. I just want the chance to help you uncover the truth. Emily nodded slowly, her emotions a whirlwind. Okay, let's do it. As they walked back to their cars, Ethan felt a mix of hope and apprehension. The journey wasn't over, but they were closer than ever to finding the truth, and nothing would stop him from protecting his daughter. Ethan and Emily waited anxiously for the DNA test results. The few days it took felt like an eternity, but during that time, their bond grew stronger. Emily, though cautious, began opening up about her life, her struggles in foster care, her dreams of becoming a nurse, and the deep-rooted feeling that she had always been searching for something, or someone. Ethan, in turn, shared stories of Sophie as a child, painting a picture of the life she had before it was torn away. Each story felt like a puzzle piece, fitting perfectly into Emily's scattered memories. Though neither said it outright, they both knew in their hearts what the results would confirm. The day the results arrived, Ethan held the envelope in his trembling hands. Emily sat beside him, her face a mixture of hope and fear. With a deep breath, Ethan tore open the envelope and scanned the contents. His eyes filled with tears as he read the words that changed everything. Parentage confirmed, 99.9% match. Emily gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "It's true," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You're my father." Ethan pulled her into a tight embrace, his own tears falling freely. "I never stopped looking for you, Emily. I never gave up hope." In that moment, years of pain, loss, and longing melted away, replaced by the warmth of reunion. For the first time in over a decade, Ethan felt whole again, but their journey wasn't over. Marcus had uncovered more evidence linking Richard Langston to Sophie's disappearance. Ethan, with renewed determination, confronted his old rival. The meeting was tense, taking place in Langston's opulent office. "Why?" Ethan demanded, slamming the adoption files on Langston's desk. "Why would you do this to me? To my daughter?" Langston, unrepentant, smirked. "It was business, Ethan. You were a threat, and I took steps to neutralize you. It's nothing personal." Ethan's hands clenched into fists. "You tore apart a family for profit. That's not business. It's cruelty." Langston shrugged. "And yet, here you are. You found her. Congratulations." Ethan's voice was ice cold. "You'll pay for what you did. I have enough evidence to expose you, and I won't rest until you're held accountable." True to his word, Ethan worked with authorities to bring Langston to justice. The case made headlines, shining a light on corruption within the adoption system. Langston's empire crumbled, and he faced criminal charges for his role in Sophie's disappearance. For Emily, life changed rapidly. Ethan welcomed her into his home, eager to make up for lost time. With his support, she enrolled in nursing school, pursuing her dream of helping others. Though the transition was overwhelming at times, Emily found strength in her father's unwavering love and the knowledge that she had finally found where she belonged. On a sunny afternoon, Ethan and Emily visited the garden where Sophie used to play. Ethan knelt to plant a rose bush, a symbol of new beginnings. Emily joined him, her hands gently pressing the soil. "This garden feels familiar," Emily said softly, "like a dream I've had before." Ethan smiled. "It was always your favorite place, and now it's ours again." As they stood together, the past no longer felt like a burden, but a bridge, a connection to the future they would build together. Ethan had spent years searching for his daughter, and now that she was back in his life, he knew he would never let her go. Father and daughter walked hand in hand toward a new chapter, their hearts filled with hope, healing, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. Thank you so much for following along and listening to this heartfelt story. I hope you were able to feel the warmth, suspense, and sweet moments that the story brought. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to support me. There will be many more exciting stories coming your way. Feel free to share this video with your friends so they can experience it too. And if you have any thoughts or suggestions, don't hesitate to leave a comment below. Thank you for being with me throughout this journey. I look forward to seeing you in the next videos. Wishing you all an amazing day.